listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug. I'm your host, Joseph Maxwell, and we are joined by, as I always say, another very special guest. But this person is really we might say the man, the myth, the legend here in the Magento community. Chances are, if you've been in the Magento community for, I'd say, much time at all, you've seen something, at least something from Peter, and probably more than just something. He's very active in the community, has contributed a tremendous amount overall to the well-being and the welfare of this community, and I'm really excited to have him on to discuss some of the challenges that he has faced, but more importantly, how he has worked through those challenges and achieved success on the other side. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, or as far as your favorite podcast syndication platform, you look for us, Smash the Bug, you'll find us there. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce Peter Blaakmeer to our podcast here today. He's the founder, owner of Elgentos in Netherlands, Groningen, Netherlands. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you on, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for all the kind words. Yeah, good to be here. I've listened to a ton of the episodes, so it's now I can do my thing on here.
That's right. It is, like I said, it is an honor and a pleasure. I guess one thing I'm curious about before we jump in, you are the founder, owner. What does your typical day look like? And I guess I'm guessing it's different than a developer. We've had a lot of developers on here, and we hear what their days are like and what their typical responsibilities are. But what does that look like usually for you?
Yeah, good question. I've been trying to find an answer that ticks all the boxes for me. So first and foremost, I'm a developer. The whole agency thing kind of came automatically with it. Yeah, I've identified my role being three parts. The one where I'm the CTO, which allows me to focus on R&D. So which internal tooling do we use? Besides Magento, will we offer shopware services? So I'm the one who starts building shopware shops. If we're going to do a recommendation tool of some kind or another, which one? So I'm trying to create some uniformity in all the tools and extensions and whatnots we use in the organization. So that's a big role. One of those is also the Cypress test suite we recently launched. So my job is to figure out whether we're going to use MFTF. Well, the answer was no. Then find an alternative. We found Cypress, and we got going with that. And I spearheaded that project, and my team members picked up where I left off. So that's one of the examples. Another one is all my duties concerning as the agency owner. So, dealing with employees and all that comes with it, purchasing stuff, I don't know, all those kinds of strategic choices. And lastly is what we call the onboarding phase for both employees, new employees, helping them navigate the organization, and new clients. And I think this is where we are a bit special. We have a policy where one of the three owners, I'm one of them, takes on a new client and does everything for that client for the first few months. So one of the owners knows everything there is to know about the project, and then we hand it off to an internal project team. That way, both the project team and the client can always fall back on somebody from the management team. From the three owners, if there's something that needs to be done in some kind or another. So 1/3 of my time I'm working on new client projects, and 1/3 of the time I'm doing internal stuff like sales and external meetings and podcasts. And 1/3 of my time I'm building internal tools or CI/CD pipelines or Cypress testing suite or stuff like that. Yeah,
very nice. I can't remember specifically, but I think didn't you guys publish an article about Cypress versus, or talking about Cypress, or maybe I'm getting confused with somebody else. I've seen a recent conversation about Cypress out there, and you bringing that up makes me want to ask the question quickly. Like, so why Cypress versus MFTF? Obviously, people say, well, MFTF is...
Have you used MFTF?
I have personally not used MFTF. We actually have another test suite that we use ourselves.
Yeah, right. So everybody who uses MFTF does not need to ask that question because it's terrible. It's slow. It's XML. It's PHP. It's slow, and it's slow, and it's also very slow.
Okay, so it's slow.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really good.
Okay.
Now, it's if you compare it to Cypress, Cypress is so integrated into browser. It's so fast, and you don't have to build in delays, and it's a very intuitive system to make these tests with, and I think it's rapidly becoming industry standard. So why Magento or Adobe chose to yet another reinvent yet another wheel. We just chose not to go the Magento way and adopt the industry standards, being Cypress.
Okay, that's fair. That makes sense. I get that, and that makes that resonates. Obviously, the biggest downside, I'm guessing, with Cypress is that you have to rebuild a lot of those tests. The idea is that MFTF comes with a full test suite that should work out of the box, but with Cypress, you have to rebuild at least some of that.
Definitely
some level of testing.
So we identified about 80 tests, and we wrote a large portion of that already. We spent about 400 hours creating that for Huva primarily, and then somebody from the community made Luma tests using our Huva tests, or basically replaced some selectors and adjusted the tests where necessary. So we have an out of the box. It's pretty complete, although it's never plug and play because it relies on sample data being there. So you have to fix it up. So put it in your project and then change some selectors and URL paths and stuff like that. But it's pretty easy. We do it in the basic set. We do it in 6 hours now for any new client.
Nice.
The whole implementation. And then you have to add custom stuff for all your custom features. But that's a lot easier in Cypress than in MFTF.
Absolutely. That's brilliant. I love hearing that. That's great. Thank you for educating us on that. All right, let's talk about challenges, things that you have fought through and come out either the victor on the other side or still fighting through it, and you will come out the victor on the other side.
Yeah. So the one I wanted to talk about, which is what I'm working on right now. I'm close to the finish line, but it's been a pretty tough one. It's where we had a new client, and that's why I'm working on this, because it's a fairly new client, and this is one of my onboarding projects. And they came to us, and we did an audit of their IT landscape, and then we discovered they had free stores, and we thought those were free store views inside one Magento installation, but unfortunately, it turned out to be free separate Magento installations.
Wow.
Which would have no, it doesn't really make sense in any scenario, but it would have made a little bit more sense if they were, three completely different stores, but they weren't. They're very alike. It's basically the same product, but with a different niche they target. Okay. So all the product data is pretty much the same, but it diverted over the years. So I'm guessing from the code and what's in there, I think they did this about 3 or 4 years ago when Magento 2, or they migrated to Magento 2. And they started off with probably the same categories in the same products, but you change product data in one, and they have to do it in the other, and then you forgot the exact wording, and then they type it out, so it's slightly different. And that's where the problem is. So combining free Magento installs with different PHP and Magento versions is already hard enough. But it would have been easier if the product data was completely different. So they, fit into each other. There's no overlap. Completely different product data, category data, no problem. Or that the product or category data was identical. So you don't really have to migrate the data because the data is exactly the same in the target install. Unfortunately, it was neither. It was kind of the same, but not really. So you have to go through everything, picking it up and then comparing it. And that was just the product data part. But then, the same goes for extensions. Different versions of different extensions. Also themes, theme files, which were kind of the same, but not really. So combining the free themes into one, finding a fallback default. I had to do MD5 checksums on the files to see whether they were exactly the same. And the files that were exactly the same, moved them into a default theme, and then create a separate theme for any of the free installs, and then move all the files of the corresponding installs to their corresponding new theme with the fallback in there. So you only have the adjustments per theme.
Yes.
And then all the other settings, core config data, everything is on default store scope 0. So you have to combine free stores with the core config data with the same store scope. So you have to, dump the SQL file of the core config data file, and then use JQ or I don't know, just bash set. Use it to replace the default scope 0 to stores and then scope 1 or 2 or 3. So by the time that I import it, it's actually it's in the right place, connected to the correct store and the correct theme. And then, run a bunch of queries to filter out all the duplicate values, of which the fallback is the same as the store view value. So it was, you run into all these little kinds of things all the time. And initially, I scoped about 20 hours for this project, but we're way past that.
That's crazy. So I have so many questions on this.
Go.
I don't think I heard you talk about orders and customers.
No.
Are those getting merged together too?
Thankfully, the client uses an ERP system with the orders, so I don't have to do all the order stuff. That would have been also problematic because the order data as such is atomic. You can just pass in order data, but you probably then want to keep the connection to the products so that people can reorder. So the client
that's what I was thinking. That would be a regular challenge right there.
Yeah.
Trying to
so
keep
the client said, I don't really care about reorders because they do custom products. It's mostly all custom products. We have a configurator in there where they can configure the product. So a reorder doesn't really happen because it's so custom for every client and every order they place. So thankfully, we didn't have to migrate the orders. We did have to migrate the customers, but we decided on not having shared accounts between the store views. So every store view is its own silo with its own customers. So that meant we were allowed to have duplicate customers in multiple store views, which was made importing the customers a lot easier.
Definitely.
But then we found out that certain customers couldn't log in with their old password. And that's because the crypt key differed between the installations.
There you go.
Yeah, and it turns out magically that Magento offers in the app ads env.php, you can enter the crypt key, but you can enter multiple crypt keys split by a new line. And then Magento will just try the first one and then try the second one, try the third one.
Wow. The funny thing is, there is a command to change the crypt key. And I've done that before, and it just added a new crypt key on the line below. And I was like, why is that?
Yeah, that's because you can rotate it. You can rotate the crypt keys and then have the new. When somebody logs in, it will rehash it with the new latest crypt key, which is the bottom one.
See,
this allows for password fallback. If you migrate from M1 to M2, you can just put in the old crypt key as well, and then migrate the hashes with the salts, and then it works.
Nice. I learn something every day. Hey, that's why I like these podcasts. That's really good. That's really, really good to know. Thank you. I guess one other question is have you been able to implement a code or like not a code freeze, a database change freeze? Like, because obviously it's one thing to do all this work now, but you're going to go live at some point, or maybe you have gone live. What's that going to look like as far as what's the go live process going to look like, or did that look like?
So when I started out, I thought of doing a database freeze and then asking the client not to do anything concerning products or categories. Luckily, it's pretty stale, so they're not changing it every day, so it won't be that much. But still, I wanted to have a reproducible way of putting this live. So what I ended up with is a bunch of bash scripts, basically, that run in a certain order and that do all kinds of stuff to merge them together. So we're not live yet, but when we go live, we will run these bash scripts. So we'll put the site in maintenance mode. and then do a database dump, and I'll basically merge the installs locally on my machine and then deploy the resulting site to our server. Incidentally, we're also going to do a server migration. So that's actually made it easier for us to set up everything on the new server and then leave all the old crap behind on the old server. Okay. So basically, it's a bunch of SH scripts that does, it dumps the databases from or downloads on the production machines of all the free separate installs. It will log in, do a database dump there. It will download the dump to my local machine, import it into a local database. Then it will dump certain tables, like the core config data table. Then it will run sed to change, the scopes. And we have a bunch of. I'll go through it in this order. So it will do the core config data SQL file. Then it will import it into the target database. It will do that for 2 of the free stores because it's going to be merged into the third store.
So you picked a master store, and then that's the store you have, and then you're just merging the other 2 stores into that.
That was the one that had already the highest Magento version. That was on 2.4.3. And the other ones were on 2.3.6 or something. So we decided to go with the 2.4.3 one. And
if you're gonna, let me just say this: if you're gonna split out, have 3 stores, at least they should be roughly the same code base, so you can just deploy the same code to all 3.
Yeah, you think that would be wise, right? But for some reason, they didn't do that.
Wow.
So then we run a bunch of EAV attributes cleanup scripts. There's a EAV cleaner extension I wrote back in the day, and that cleans up, lingering attributes, attribute values, fallback values, stuff like that. Then it will change stuff like the logo. So this is where I just changed it myself in the backend and then copied out the resulting SQL to automate that part. And then it dumps out the CMS blocks and the CMS pages. But there's an interesting thing because when you dump the CMS block table, it will also dump the entity ID or the block ID with it. Yep. And the same goes for the pages, the page ID with it. Which are obviously numbered 1 and then upwards, but that's also the case in the target database. So I need to have, I'd run a query which does, I think it's -- compact or -- no create info. It's a flag for MySQL dump that skips the primary key column. Okay. So then you'll only get the data. So when I import it into the new database, it will just auto increment the new entries when the pages and the blocks are added. But then you still have to add it to the CMS block store table to connect it to the
I was going to ask
store.
about that. Okay.
Yeah. So I first fetch the latest ID of the latest block in the target database. Then I import all the new blocks and then fetch the then latest ID and then run a for each loop that inserts for every new CMS block or CMS page ID an entry into the store table for that specific store.
Yeah.
And then they're connected. And then it magically works because that works on an identifier,
right?
And not the internal ID. So that's nice. Okay. Except for the homepage. So the homepage has home as the URL key, which you configure under stores configuration, general web or something, default pages. Yeah. And then you click the home. But that's stored as the identifier. So in the core config data, it will show home. But they're all 3 of them are home. So which one? So do you know how Magento solves that for that use case? Have you ever encountered that?
I thought that particular configuration value was the actual page, like the auto increment ID, but
it isn't.
That would be my guess right there.
Yeah, no, it isn't. It's actually the identifier. But if there's a collision between the identifiers, Magento will add a pipe and then the page ID. So in my case, it will be home pipe 25 or something.
Okay.
So that means a specific page for the home page, and then it will add the ID there, so it knows how to differentiate between the 3 different home pages.
Wow.
Yeah, and then that's just the blocks and the pages and stuff. But then we have CMS pages that are in the original target database that are assigned to all store views. And when there's a CMS block that is assigned to all store views, it will show it for all store views, even though there are more specific ones, which violates pretty much every other Magento rule. The more specific, the more prevalence a certain configuration has over the default, except for some reason in the CMS block area. So then I run a query to change all the blocks that have multiple identifiers and change the all store views to the specific store that it's in, because I can't change all the blocks to the specific store because some blocks are shared between all store views.
Okay.
So see how this goes from I can, one little thing and I can fix this, and then you fall into another one, and then another one, and then it keeps
and
on
every
going.
area is so unique. So let's talk about scoping real quick. So coming into this project, correct me if I'm wrong, you thought that there was 3 store views. Is that and you were going to work on that, or maybe talk me through, and all of us through, what was the original scope? I mean, the original layout of Magento scope. So how website store views. I'm guessing it was one store view for one website store view for each. And then what is the new scoping system looking like? So is it going to be 3 websites with obviously a store and a store view for each? Like what? And then because I want to talk through what made you come to that decision point as far as choosing those individual scopes.
Yeah. So we first did a quick audit when the client came to us, and we noticed they were all running in single store mode, which is Magento's way of not allowing you to switch into a store view, which is great because you don't have to use single store mode. And if you use, if you don't enable single store mode in Magento, but you still have one website with one group with one store view, then you can still switch to the store view and change some settings there, even though it's just one website, one group, one store view. Thankfully, these were all in single store mode, so everything was in default 0 scope.
Good. Okay.
So then we decided to move everything over to the new situation, and we always do one website, one store group, one store view. We almost never put multiple store views inside one store group, inside one website. That is because a lot of third-party extensions, or it's better now, but it used to be terrible, where they would only allow you to change certain settings on the website level, and you couldn't change it on the store view level. So let's say we added, aside from a Dutch store view, we added a German store view, and we wanted to hide one of the payment methods in the German store view. That setting would be only in the default, in the website level, and not in the store view level. So we couldn't change it. So we decided then on to always make a separate website, which has its drawbacks, especially indexing wise. But as long as you don't have a huge web shop and optimize it pretty okay, then this is a more flexible solution. I'm not saying the most optimal one, but it's a more flexible solution.
That's fair. Absolutely. Okay.
So we just created in the app adds config, you can just add your store settings. And if you run setup upgrade, Magento will identify these and will ask you, hey, do you want to create these? So that's what we do. Problem is you can't run setup upgrade in non-interactive mode, because if you add that as non-interactive, then it will still ask you do you really want to create this store view? So that's why we use yes, which is a Linux command that always pushes the yes to any input, any standard input it encounters. So we use yes and then pipe and then bin Magento setup upgrade. So it will always answer yes to every question that comes along. So if I re-import a fresh database from the target database and then I run my script, then it will automatically add those store views, and it will always get the same ID because so that I can rely on that one.
Very nice. Nice. Yeah, and I think that whole app.c config, it's underutilized, just dropping those the store configuration, not in the store, no. This, how do I say this? The scopes in there.
The scopes,
yeah, scoping. Store configuration is a disaster. We had a client that somebody did that for them, and it was just a nightmare
Oh
for
yeah,
them.
they can't change it anymore. Yeah,
No, they can't. Then they have to unlock certain things, and some of it was, and it was
they
out
have
of
to
sync
redeploy.
too.
Yeah,
What's that?
they have to redeploy to change the setting.
Yep, that's right. It was a bit of a disaster. So, but it's so good. Internationalization. Let's see, what are those that are available? Those the website store view scopes, themes, and internationalization. Obviously, you can do store configuration, but
but internationalization. Do you put that in config.php?
We have been doing that, but yeah,
That seems like the worst possible. So I think it's sometimes I run into it, and it's not a logical place to put it. The file isn't called language or i18n or whatever. It's in the config, so I wouldn't expect it to be there. I remember once looking for a translation, I had to do a full code page first, and then it turned up in the config file. We don't like it. We don't use it. We don't do it in the database either, because that's even worse.
Definitely.
Now it goes. Our translations either go in the extension itself or in the theme, in the i18n folders.
I'm going to sound like an idiot here, but I guess I not really paid any attention to what's in that key inside app-etsy config. So if it was strings, I totally agree. It's not strings. The right place to put it. Okay. So then we'll be making a change on our process there just to make sure that doesn't happen either. Good. That's good. That's really good. I appreciate that. Listen, this has been really cool. I love hearing the process, and I think it affirms to me a couple of things. First, it's easy for us as developers to beat ourselves up, I think, over this project that you came into, and it looked like, I don't know, remember what you said your first the estimate was. You thought it was going to take
hours.
Well, it's 20 hours. Yeah, so you thought it was going to take 20 hours. As you got into it, it just completely ballooned. And I mean, maybe more discovery would have helped solve that. I mean, there's always a solution to something like this, but in the long run, stuff happens. And but what I see here is you have taken ownership of this. You are ensuring that this client is going to be thrilled with the final end product, and you're taking every step necessary very thoroughly. Obviously, as we talked about just a little bit of that project, same as blocks and pages, all that has gone into consideration to make sure those are successfully brought over. That's not to mention all the other aspects of that too. And I think it's really good. What's that?
Well, code changes. I just remember that I imported everything into the database, and I thought it was okay. And then I checked the front end, and it still showed up the default setting. Turned out that there's so you have the config interface and the scope config interface. But the config interface does not care about scope, which is okay because the previous agency that built this didn't have to take scope into consideration. So they just injected the config interface without the scope thingy.
Wow.
But then I introduced scope. So I had to go through all the custom PHP code they wrote and app code to look for the config interface and change it to a scope config interface and add the store scope as a parameter to make sure it will actually fetch the store configuration scope on. Which took me about an hour to realize. I'm like, oh wait, maybe they did that. Yeah,
good for you. Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. And so I think the note that a lot of that the developers who are listening to this can take away is obviously maybe none of us. I don't think I've had I've done it in a slightly different way, but like, okay, maybe they're not actually going to merge three stores together, but there's a lot of takeaways in this that, being thorough, watching out as you're working through this, thinking what are the ramifications of what I'm doing, and understanding how each one of these parts worked. If you are, nothing against junior developers, but if you were 6 months into Magento and you got this project thrown on your lap,
impossible.
Yeah, it would have been an absolute disaster.
It's been a accumulation of. I feel like this was one of those projects that 10 years of Magento experience kind of accumulated into this terrible project I'm doing right now, and it's very fulfilling at a certain level, but also very frustrating. And I tend to, it's not we don't have to deliver this, in a week's time or so. So every week I spend about a few 4 or 5 hours, and then I'm already fed up with it again because there's so many moving parts, and then every time you think you're there, but you're not, and then you have to pick up your courage again to do it again and invest more time. But it's ultimately, this is going to be so fulfilling if everything works. But it's probably a once in a lifetime thing, because how often do you encounter a situation like this?
Well, and gratefully rarely.
Yeah, and that's also the reason why I'm picking this up and not one of my junior team members or something, because they would definitely get lost in this. For instance, for the products, I first tried dumping the product table and then putting that into it, but there's just too many entity IDs and value IDs that cause collisions. So eventually I went with the Firebear import-export extension, which is excellent, and I just used that to export all the data from the other two instances, and then use the import those into the target database. Except some data needs to be changed. So where do you change the data? So for instance, the default category, the root category, it's called default category in all 3 stores, but the other 2 share the category structure. But the first one, the target database, has a completely different category structure. So you'll have to create another root category. And that should not be called default category, because then the importer would not know where to import it. So you have to change the wording default category inside the JSON files with another, second default category or whatever you're going to call it. So that forced me to, modify the JSON file, which is the output of the database of the export, or modify it in the database before you do the export. And it turned out it's actually easier to edit the JSON files as long as you know JQ, which is a command line JSON parser and editing thing, of which the syntax is worse than regular expressions. It's it took me quite a while to get used to. Thankfully, one of my co-owners is a JQ wizard, so he helped me along. But that's one of the toughest syntaxes I've had to work with on the console.
Nice.
But that does it lightning fast, and it changes all the data, and it removes columns, and it's a great tool once you know how to work with it, and that really helped in getting the data uniform and consistent.
Wow, that's well put. That's good. A lot of good tools we talked about and all that. So this is good. I appreciate the massive knowledge dump here, and it's significant. It's a lot of, like you say, 10 years of experience have gone into this, and I appreciate you being willing to share that experience with us. One final question I always like to close with. You lead Elgentos. You're, like you said, you split up your time, and I think from what I remember, it was like roughly 33% of your time, which, if you work 8-hour days, that's about 2 to 3 hours, roughly 2.5 hours of your time a day is spent on actual client-facing work. How do you stay sharp? How do you stay excited about everything? Because again, you're one of those people, especially in a founder owner position, that you stayed sharp on this, and the industry. Magento hasn't changed too much. Like I was looking at product repository, it's literally not had a commit on it, a substantial commit on it since 2018. But all that to say, how do you stay ahead of things and keep your skills sharp?
So that's one of the reasons why I still like doing client work, because it forces me to stay on top. For example, when Hoova came around, we got an early access, early preview, and we were blown away immediately by it. And I could, as R&D is one of my responsibilities, I could immediately gauge what this would do for our front-end developers. I used it to migrate one of our PWA sites to Hoova, and I'm a backender, so if I could do it, they definitely could. So I immediately saw that potential, and that got me excited. So I shared it with them, and then eventually they took it on, and now we do only Hoova. But working with clients and still knowing what goes on technically, that opens the door to for new technologies like Cypress. At one point you have your unit tests, and we've done that, and we have a deploy or a CI/CD deploy thing, which does all these checks. And then at one point you're sitting there, okay, what more can we do to raise the quality of what we provide for our clients? And then we had QA. We have external QA services that does QA for us, but we still wanted to automate a part of that. And then you look at MFTF, and then you start working with it. And then you can look at MFTF and then get excited, but once you start working with it and you actually have to write these tests, then less so.
I get that.
So I think doing the onboarding for these clients is really valuable for both the clients, the product teams, and myself to stay on top of what goes on in the Magento world.
Okay.
Yeah, and how do I keep myself excited for grunt work like I'm doing right now? And I think dosing is a large part of it. So I don't fill my time with just programming, so I can switch tasks. And sometimes I'm invigorated, and then I spend the whole day on this exact issue, and then I have 8 hours, and then I'm really happy that of the progress I made. And sometimes after 2 hours, I'm just fed up with it, and then I do some other work on internal stuff. And I usually time box per day, but sometimes I don't have to, and then I switch it around a little bit. So that flexibility also gives me another perspective, and then I can lay it to rest for a few days, and then my mind works while I sleep, and then you get up, and then you suddenly remember a solution that you can apply to your problem. Yeah, that's how it works.
Excellent. Well, Peter, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for the massive knowledge transfer you just released. You shared whatever. That was very much appreciated, and we'll have to have you back on. I'm sure there'll be another crazy project you can talk about, or another win, another success that you can share with all of us to inspire all the rest of our listeners.
Thanks for having me, and keep doing the good work. It's great, these podcasts, and I love hearing how other people attack the problems in totally different ways than I would do, but it gives perspective. Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a tremendous learning opportunity for me right there. Just I'm the first person that gets to hear this stuff, so I always enjoy. So thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thanks. See you, Joseph.
Well, that was an absolute pleasure talking with Peter. And again, I kind of already outlined some of those points, but just to reiterate here, unfortunately, this was a project that was, it seemed like it was one thing, but it ended up being a lot bigger. But that's how projects go. I mean, we don't have crystal balls that we can see exactly what's going on and, to be able to know the future. It is what it is. But instead of just saying, oh, I can't do that, he has taken the bull by the horns and worked through intricate piece after intricate piece of this project. And it's a difficult project. It's a really difficult project. It's probably one of the most difficult projects, I'm guessing, you could tackle in this space. He's tackling it, and he's working through it, and he's fighting through it, and he's going to become the victor on the other side. So I hope this serves as an inspiration to those of you who, as you listen to this, that you take heart. Even if you come across a very difficult project, keep pushing through it. One other thing to note is he did mention that he's worked with other people on this project. There's going to be some of those projects that you tackle that you're not going to have all the answers for. And you know what? You probably shouldn't have all the answers for it, because nobody can know all answers to everything all the time. Go and talk to your teammates. Go talk to a senior developer on your team, a junior developer on your team for that matter. Talk to other people, get advice on the challenges that you're facing, and it will make you a better developer.